overnight, and it worried us so much about predators. We even had biologists and interns sleep near the condor in a sleeping bag just to try to provide a little protection to ward off predators. There's been some really amazing efforts over the years. Thankfully, though, the birds now, because they're 1.5 years of age, that situation I described a minute ago was a younger bird, about 8 months of age. And so we've learned the hard way, it's best to let them go when they're older. And when they're about 1.5 years of age, they tend to do very well getting up off the ground, roosting at night, and able to learn how to fly a little bit better without as much trial and error.
Yeah, and really, some folks have asked what to expect when that door is open, and do they all of a sudden just burst out and fly it, or do they sit and wait for a while? And I think from my experience, it could be either. They could be very deliberate in their decision to go out of the release pen. They're never just pushed out. This is a soft release, and so the birds will make the decision. And sometimes it is their immediate first flight, which we can see and enjoy. And then sometimes it's just a lot of waiting. There's a question about the population as a whole. Ventana Wildlife Society manages the Central California population in collaboration with Pinnacles National Park. Pinnacles works on the east side of the Salinas Valley. We work on the west side of the Salinas Valley. And of course, the birds fly across even on a daily basis. So there's the Central California population, and I believe we're at about 95 birds right now. There's also the Southern California population, which has about the same number. That's currently a disjunct population, but in time we expect them to sort of gradually grow together. That population is managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And then the Peregrine Fund, they manage birds in Arizona, and they extend into Utah, and there's about 100 birds there. So all told, have we hit 400 condors in the wild at this point, Kelly? It's pretty close to that, I guess.
Yeah, I wish I was prepared for this. I have a good report from the end of 2019. Will only take me a second to get to, but I do believe we did get over 400. Let me just verify that. I do want to correct, unfortunately, the population in Central California is no more than 90 at this point, given the losses caused by the Dolan fire. I think we sometimes still think of some of those birds in the missing category, but unfortunately we do deem those birds lost to the fire.
Yeah, it was just earlier this year where we were planning the celebration of the 100th condor in Central California, and unfortunately we've had a little bit of a setback with the fire, and these releases will help. I think we're getting Joe back online. One of the questions that came up, and maybe this is a question for Joe as he gets connected with us once again, and that question is just for the viewers who are with us, when we might be able to expect the door to open up. I know a lot of people are sort of breaking away from work, and we promise we won't tell anyone. We're glad that you're with us, but we also plan to be here for a little while. And so
yeah,
I think part of the delay was to really sort of to improve our chances with the weather. We know that it's continually clearing and getting better, but if we have some indication of, for those viewers who have to sort of check out and want to plan to be back when the doors open, if there's anything that we can tell them about when we expect that might be, that might help some of our viewers plan their viewing with us. And again, thanks everyone for your patience and being with us. Joe, are you back with us?
Yeah, I think so. I dropped off. I'm not sure what happened there, but it gave me an opportunity to check in with the crew. Conditions are getting slightly better. They're not to the point where we want to let them out yet, but they are improving. So I'm hoping, you know, we're within an hour of release. Again, that's all condition dependent, but we're hoping the weather starts to make a turn here for the better. Again, the weather system has moved out, but we have some lingering fog, which will produce what looks like rain on the cam right now. You'll see drops coming. Can everyone see the screen? I think I have it on the live feed right now. Yeah, so what you're seeing is just, this is all fog, mist kind of rain. This isn't like actual rainfall. This is stuff blowing off the trees. You can see it's just a heavy, wet fog. And again, once this kind of lifts out, I mean, it's going to be pretty shortly after it that we would hit the green light to let these birds go. So we're just obviously want to have clear skies for these, you know, clearer skies for these guys to go out on, especially not fog. But again, you know, we're just waiting out the weather, but things are definitely looking better overall. So yeah, just thanks for your patience, everyone. This is what life is like for condor biologists. This is we spend a lot of time waiting around the elements and waiting for the birds to do certain things. You know, especially out in the wild when you're trying to find, I think one of the most challenging aspects of our job is finding condor nest. You know, for such a big bird, they can find really remote, you know, needle in the haystack type places to nest. And even with all this fancy technology we have, you know, with GPS tags, yes, you can see, I was just noticing the bird, that's 995 flapping. They're getting those wings dried out, which is a good sign. But back to what I was talking about with the nest, you have to have a lot of patience anytime you work with any wildlife, especially condors. So you might sit in a spot for a week just waiting for that one time the bird will fly in and out to the area you think it's nesting. And even whether it's a redwood nest or a cliff nest, some of these nests are in really remote areas, and we're looking from a mile across a canyon, you know, at a little pinpointed area, just looking for any signs of condor activity. And then once you know they're in that area, then you hone in and get a little bit closer and a little bit closer until you actually find the nest site. And even within the redwoods, it can be really tricky because you can narrow it down to a stand of redwoods, but you don't know which one it is, how high up it is. Is it down lower in the tree? Is it way up higher? You know, it's just, and for cliff nests, it's even more challenging because you think the cliff is not that big until you see a condor fly to it and it looks like a speck. So it's, you know, we do joke about it, but you know, today we're definitely on condor time and we got a little weather we're still contending with. But I do know the outlook is looking clear. Yeah, this bird is doing what a lot of birds do. When that wing kicks up, they'll spread out their wings. Yeah, you can see it's shaking its head off of water. Again, they're built pretty darn tough. They can handle these elements, and like I was saying earlier, they spend a lot of time. They have a gland at the base of their tail. It's called a preen gland, and it produces an oil that they go down and they'll dip, basically almost like they'll dip their beak in it, and it releases some of the oil, and they'll take their beak, and you'll see them preen, and they'll lay that oil down on their top of their feathers and create a basically waterproof layer on their feathers. And so it's a pretty cool process that, you know, not just condors do, but that's a lot of free-flying birds do this. And yeah, this is part of condor life right here. But you know, it goes from it'll go from gray and dreary to sunny pretty quick up on these ridge areas. So again, I think our patience is going to pay off today. I got my fingers crossed. But yeah, so we're just figured this is a great time just to catch you guys up on, you know, what's happening with condors. you know, we love all the questions, and yeah, just talking more about our project, what we hope to see from these birds. You know, what I was saying earlier, we're excited that we might get more release birds. I don't have the actual stud book numbers yet of which birds we will end up getting, but it's looking really strong that we will. At first, we didn't know for sure we were going to get them, but now I feel I'm about 80% sure we're going to get them. So again, that'd be a nice boost to the flock this year. Before the fire happened, we were over 100 birds in the wild. After the fire, we were just under 90. So we've had some birds actually fledge in the wild this year, despite the fires, which is really great news. You know, not only in Nico surviving the fire, and you know, it was unfortunate Nico had to be evacuated, but we did have a nest in the area not too far from Nico's nest, a redwood cavity, and the chicks survived. So, you know, despite the fire, we did have multiple birds fledge in the wild. All the birds of pinnacles fledged. So those birds added to the flock number, and despite the losses. So, you know, again, we see the fire's temporary setback. You know, I'll definitely miss those birds that were lost. You know, it's hard to replace a bird like Kingpin. He was the leader of the flock. You know, he led the flock for years. So, you know, if one of these birds will definitely step up, maybe a 219, maybe a 209, maybe 168, you know, big boy, he could jump up. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see who takes over the throne, so to speak, and becomes the real leader of the flock. But yeah, you know, that happens in a lot of wildlife projects, you know, especially when you're recovering a species like this that was at the brink. You know, Mike mentioned it yesterday, you know, the flock hit an all-time low in the early 80s. And, you know, when they brought them all in 1987, there were only 27 condors left. I mean, that was it. And we really were fortunate in that those 27, there was an abundance of genetic diversity. We got really lucky. More than half of those birds were, you know, were genetically unique. So we were able to rebuild this flock, and we now have a very strong, you know, as compared to other species that have bottleneck, like similar to condors. We're very fortunate. The genetics are really strong for condors. And, you know, that's something we get asked quite a bit is, you know, first thing you wonder is, wow, really that many condors left. How are the genetics? And yeah, we dodged that bullet. It looks like we definitely had a good breeding stock to start from. And now, you know, in talking with our geneticists who assisted a team of geneticists that helped map the genetics for the program, they say you know, in comparison to some other species like cheetahs and other species that have bottleneck, condors are looking really good. So that's actually really good news. Another big positive in moving forward with a species like this is knowing you have really good genetics. And, you know, just knowing that, you know, since we've been releasing these birds, they've been doing all the right things. You know, they're pre-programmed. Their instincts are all still there. You know, I think people were worried this time in captivity of, you know, the captive breeding, preserving the genetics, that some of the behavior would be lost in the species. And, you know, I always argued, how do you take hundreds of thousands of years of behavior that's genetically encoded in an animal out of it in a handful of years? You know, it's just, this species is designed to do what it's supposed to do. You know, so you put them out where there's, in the areas where they used to inhabit, they quickly fill that niche again. And we've seen it, it's been loud and clear. You know, the condors are nesting where they used to nest, and not only nesting where they used to nest, but literally occupying historic territories, historically feeding where they were seen and feeding. You know, I think one of the coolest days of my life with condors was I was out tracking. You know, we had just started releasing the birds. You know, I've been fortunate to be here since the beginning for Ventana in 1997 and leading those first releases. And I remember, you know, I was definitely a little wary. You know, it was a very daunting time because we didn't have that many birds and no one had ever really the actual how to release them was being figured out. We were trying different things. It was a little more tenuous, obviously, than now. And, you definitely had doubts. Could these birds really reoccupy where they used to thrive? And, and here we were, this coast population where the last data known, was hundreds of years old. Some of the last sightings were in the late 1800s. So we were really challenged in terms of we didn't have a whole lot of great data to work with. And so right now, just on real quick break on the live feed just went to cam highlights, and this happens periodically. I was describing it yesterday. We periodically lose the signal, especially in bad weather. So it's usually a couple minutes to go out, maybe sometimes longer. Again, it's something we look into. We're trying to figure out what exactly causes it, but the fact that we get this internet signal beam so far, and it's such a remote spot, that it's almost impossible not to have glitches like this in the system. So it is one of the drawbacks that we periodically do lose the signal, and fortunately it always comes back. And but back to where we were talking before, one of my greatest memories was we had been releasing the birds a couple of years, and we had a couple birds go missing, and we were searching up and down the coast looking for them. And it was it's a bird that's no longer with us, 164, and a bird that is still with us, 171. They had been missing for about a week, and we were becoming very worried. And I was down tracking the coast one day, and I was right near an area where we knew sea lions love to congregate. It's called Lion Cove. It's a popular area in Big Sur for people to see, if you want to go see pinnipeds, or you want to just basically check out condors. And I was tracking there, and I always was looking for the birds up. And as I was leaving to go back to go get some equipment, I turned and my antenna went down towards the ocean. I got one of the bird's signals really strong, and it immediately clicked. Oh my God, they're down on the beach. And I went over to this edge of the cliff, and there they were, pigging out on a dead sea lion carcass. And while it was one of the most, it was a really intense scene to watch, but it was one of the most awesome scenes that I ever witnessed. And it was, to me, it was like, these birds know exactly what to do, and they're gonna make it. That was that moment right there that I knew that we were on the path to success, and I knew these birds could figure it out. And yeah, so that was to this day, it's one of the coolest things. Here we went from thinking these birds were possibly missing, possibly dead, to they weren't missing at all. They were down doing what they're supposed to do. They're down feeding on a natural carcass that washed up on the ocean, doing what they've been designed to do for thousands of years. And the last time that had been observed was over the closest thing to it had been Lewis and Clark seeing condors feed on a whale at the mouth of the Columbia River in the early 1800s. So it was a very historic moment, huge moment. Since that time, in 2006, the birds found their very first whale. So marine mammals have just become such an important food source. And as everyone knows, protection measures to protect the marine mammals have boosted populations of not only sea lions, but the whale populations have climbed back up. And this in turn has benefited the condor. They have a part of their ecosystem is back in place. And, there's more of a opportunity, a chance for a carcass to wash up that could benefit condors. So really cool to see how it's all interconnected. But I don't think ever we realized how important the marine mammals were to condor survival. Because not only, not that the condors are wholly dependent on the coastline, they also feed inland, and when they're inland, they're feeding on anything from a domestic cow that may have died on somebody's ranch to we've had condors feed on elk that were predated by mountain lions. We've had, just deer, wild pigs. And again, in that mix, while while they're foraging inland, they may come across a carcass shot with lead ammunition. And that's where this threat, this primary threat to their recovery, comes square in front of us, this lead poisoning hurdle. And, the great work that, Mike's leading our charge on the free non-lead ammunition. And that is the number one way, besides our direct outreach of reaching out to hunters and ranchers and engaging them in the conversation and showing them the benefits of, how the switch to non-lead really helps benefit not only condors, but all wildlife. Because, bald eagles are poisoned by lead. They scavenge. I mean, I don't think people realize how much bald eagles actually scavenge, but they are really efficient scavengers. They also, obviously they hunt for fish and that sort of thing, but we see bald eagles scavenging right along condors quite a bit, as well as golden eagles. So it's really a threat to all scavenging birds and any ground scavengers, the lead poisoning. So we're really trying to move towards non-lead. And Mike, it'd be a great time maybe to add what some of the data you can share on the non-lead front. I think it's really awesome.
I think Joe is really touching nicely on why we're so optimistic about the eventual full recovery of California condors. Being where we've been to where we are now, Joe stresses the fact that the birds are doing all of the right things. They're finding food on their own. They're nesting on their own. Now it's time for the humans to do the right thing. And so that's what we're working on in cooperation with the hunting and ranching community. They are helping us lead the way towards reducing the lead exposure for California condors. And I'm very proud to be part of the free non-lead ammunition program for Ventana Wildlife Society. And among the Condor collaborators, National Park Service, the Institute for Wildlife Studies, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Peregrine Fund, all of these organizations with Ventana Wildlife Society are doing outreach programs for hunters and ranchers to work proactively with them to help reduce lead exposure. And what we're seeing is a tremendous attitude response from the hunting community towards switching to non-lead ammunition. And in time, we feel that that's really going to make a difference in lowering the mortality rate. And that is key towards this goal of self-sustainability, because as Joe said, the condors are doing the right thing. They're producing in the wild, but the humans need to follow suit. We need to reduce the lead exposure, and we need to stop starting massive wildfires. And I think we're going to, we have great optimism that we're going to reach that goal. Joe, one of the questions that I wanted to touch on, actually personally, is the question about Kingpin. Kingpin had tremendous experience, and the question was, well, with his experience, why did he succumb to the wildfire? Can't condors fly away from the threat? And my response is yes, ideally the condors can escape wildfire, and most of them did. Unfortunately, there are times where the wildfire will catch them unaware. I can equate this with humans. Humans are so concerned about dying in a wildfire that we invented these things called smoke alarms. And we rely on smoke alarms to wake us up at night and to save our lives. Certainly, I would not want to go to bed without knowing that my smoke alarm isn't working. And so condors, they don't have that same advantage. Some condors can succumb to fire just being on their roost, unaware of the danger, and they just don't have the time to escape, or if it's nighttime, They just don't have the mobility and visibility to find an escape route. And so it's understandable, unfortunately, that some condors are vulnerable to mortality if they get caught in the path of the fire. And so up until this year, we've, in 2008, I guess a couple of condors were lost, but this year, the timing and the location of the fire was really disadvantageous. And unfortunately, it appears like we've lost kingpin and other condors. So I appreciate the question there from Julia about the fire. Also, Joe, if you wouldn't mind touching on the question of shelter for these birds in the pen. Is there shelter, and do they need it? Do they seem to just enjoy sitting in the rain? They may appear to be a little bit uncomfortable to us in the pen in the rain, but the wild birds are also in the rain, and do they actually prefer to sit out away from the shelter? And so I'll let you comment on that, Joe, if you would.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yeah, it's a great question. It's one as being in our position that we obviously are concerned about, but it is true. They tend to gravitate towards the being out exposed in the elements. The back portion of the pen, if you're looking at the pen right now to the left, if it's still streaming there, back towards the back of the pen is completely covered, and there's perching there that they can move to get out of the elements. And as you can see, I think there might be one bird back in the corner there under that, just under the edge, but I believe all the birds are out and about. And again, out in the wild, that will be the case. They find actually pretty good shelter in trees. They can perch near the trunk of a tree and stay fairly dry. But again, in the wild, you're getting wet, you're getting exposed to the wind. There's no real way around it. But yeah, fortunately, nature has designed these birds well. They're well equipped, and they tend to, as you can see right now, there's condors actually looking around to feed. So they seem, when you watch them, they seem to be pretty much unfazed by it. So it's I think it just speaks to how tough these birds are. We know historically condors ranged up into British Columbia, into the Northwest. And for any of you who have been up to the Northwest in a winter, it's tried and true, wet and cold and tough. So if these birds once thrived in climates like that, this would pale in comparison. So I think, just from what we can see over the years, obviously, that these birds don't shy away from rough weather. And, when you think of it on a strategic standpoint, if you're a condor, rough weather usually means somehow that you might have the death of some other animals and potential food. So they know after a storm clears out that if something died, it's probably going to be pretty easy to find. So the storms actually can produce, potential food for these carcasses for the condors. So there's, it's kind of there's definitely some kind of potential symbiotic kind of relationship there with weather and condors. And again, it only takes 15, 20 minutes of sunny weather, and these guys would be ready to go. So it's pretty amazing to see how quickly they dry out, how quickly they can just rebound from the harshest. We've had them see them with snow on their backs, and they fluff off the snow and off they go. So it's pretty amazing to see the adaptability of this species. Even right now, we're releasing them here on the coast, and then you have the other extreme, only 40 miles inland of Pinnacles National Park, which is probably one of the hottest places in the lower 48. It's very low rainfall, almost complete opposite weather of Big Sur. And it's amazing. The condors bounce back and forth between those two microclimates like they're nothing. And, a bird could be on the coast in fog in the morning, and in the afternoon be in 110 degrees on a rock formation in Pinnacles National Park. and obviously they just adapt quickly and all the way through it. And then you go even further down, you go down into Arizona, Utah, and you have a whole range of climates there that the condors are unfazed by. So it's, I would say down there, they even get a little more snow, up on the Kaibab Plateau, some of these areas where the condors thrive down around up near, up in Arizona, and even up into Utah, they're up in these, on the edge of the snow line, skirting that snow line year round. So it's pretty awesome to see the resiliency of this bird. I mean, I really put them up there with the toughest animals on the planet, just in my own experience, and what they're able to endure and just completely be unfazed by it. So if there's something to appreciate, I think if there's something for humans to learn from a species, it would be from the condors. It would be, grace, resiliency, tough, truly great traits for a species, and just the adaptability I love. I just love how opportunistic they are. Here they are scavenging, yet they have a very high niche in the ecosystem. So it's really interesting. It's fascinating to see a species like this, and just how important they are to the ecosystem to have these big scavengers out there. Your cleanup crews, so to speak, out there cleaning up some of these potentially, carcasses that could proliferate disease. Condors can come in and just clean them up. They're kind of like nature's purifiers. They come in and clean things up, and they also, when they go in to say feed on a big whale, they're big enough to get into a whale, whereas some of the other local scavengers might not be able to get into it. Like a turkey vulture benefits from a condor showing up. They might have to wait their turn, but at least now they can get into the carcass. So it's kind of really cool to watch all these really cool relationships, the condor has with the sorry if you hear those dings, that's updates from the crew. So that was my phone dinging. Let me just check in see what they're seeing.
Yeah, and while Joe is doing that, I'd like to clarify the situation with the non-lead ammunition requirement. A couple of people have asked about that. There is legislation that has been passed that requires the use of non-lead ammunition. First, it was within the Condor range. That started around 2008. And then they passed another law which extended the non-lead requirement throughout the state of California. So the rules are pretty clear. If you take wildlife, any species of wildlife with any firearm anywhere in the state of California, you must use non-lead ammunition. And so that is the rule. It's still legal to sell and buy lead ammunition, and it's still legal to use lead ammunition at target ranges where you're not targeting actual wildlife. But to actually hunt wildlife and for shooting ground squirrels on ranches, you must use non-lead ammunition. And so we're encouraged by the legislation, but what we're seeing, especially now with the COVID year and just this year in general, there's been some challenges with that non-lead transition. And I think the main issue is that we are seeing empty shelves in the stores right now. There is a run on firearms and ammunition. And so there is a shortage for those hunters that are looking for ammunition. They're not finding it. And for those ranchers wanting to shoot ground squirrels, they're not able to purchase the ammunition because it's just not available. And that lack of availability first started with the non-lead variants. And so what we're seeing in the stores is there might be a few lead brands, but a lot of the non-lead ammunition is right now not available. And so that means that condors can be vulnerable if people choose to continue using lead ammunition, even though there is that law in place. And so our program is to work with hunters and ranchers to help them gain access to non-lead ammunition, especially during this time where it's so difficult to find. And so I just wanted to clarify that. If maybe, Joe, you can work in some answers to a couple of the questions. There are some viewers who are interested in the water situation in Big Sur and the progress of regaining that water flow. It's not directly related to the San Simeon site, but at some point, if we can work that in. And also maybe what you expect to see once the doors are finally open and the birds are released. There are some that are wondering, are they all going to go out together, or will they go out one by one, or what's the protocol? Are there any patterns, or is it just, well, anything can happen? And then what are some of the things that we're looking at short term as encouraging signs that these birds are doing well in the wild? What do we want to see from these birds once they do leave the pen?
Yeah, good question. So I got three there. So the first one, let's see, we worked, it was last week, the whole crew, I think I was explaining yesterday, we've been able to reestablish getting access to the Big Sur Condor Sanctuary. The area was heavily damaged by the fire. There was just a lot of tree fall on the road, a lot of rocks, a lot of slides. So we worked with Blaze Engineering to get that road cleared. And we still have some hazard tree removal to contend with, but getting access was huge. That was our biggest obstacle, really, because you can't start anything until you get access into the area again. So that was our first challenge, and that went successfully. And then myself and the crew went up. We have actually in our last fire in 2008, we discovered a natural spring nearby the release area, near the release pen area. And fortunately, it's by gravity, it's above where we're at. So we were able to gravity feed water down from the spring, put in a small little spring box and gravity feed water down to the Condor site. And this was just another, again, when you're releasing birds, if you can have water out and food, it's really important. And especially in when you still have lead poisoning as a threat, it's nice to have these backup, the water source and the food sources especially till we get past lead poisoning. So the water is really key, and the birds love it. And we created there was a natural rock formation right above the release pen near where we put out the supplemental food, where the live streaming camera is. And we basically just filled in the gaps and turned it into kind of a natural pool. And so we basically are able to pipe water to that location. All the pipe during the fire burned. Most of it was underground, but even some of the stuff underground burned. So we had to replace a lot of pipe. That was a big project for the crew, and that took us a full day just to get the pipe replaced, and then another day just to figure out how to get everything working again. And yeah, we were able to get that going last week, and the birds immediately responded. The water, we had been manually filling it with water jugs. I think I put that in one of my Zoom presentations last month. We were manually filling the water. So to have this water just naturally flowing and overflowing, its constant flow through the spring to this pool is really ideal. And that's more like what they would find in the wild. A spring seep out to a pool, that would be a typical kind of water source for the birds out in the wild. So to be able to replicate that and have it benefit the birds is great. And just it's a really great time to watch condors when they're bathing. The social hierarchy tends to break down a little bit. they become a little more laid back. And it's all about getting, and it is funny to see this really dominant, strong bird all wet and wet to literally down to its bones, just wet from after taking a bath. And it's a more animated time to watch the birds. And yeah, so having the water source back has been great. It's not only it's another way too to have a spot for birds to come back to for monitoring, using the live streaming cams supplied by explore.org to monitor and keep track of which birds, because we have some birds out there that their radio transmitters have gone dead, and we're anxious to recatch them to replace that tag. But in the meantime, the only way to really know where they are and what they're doing is by visually seeing them. So the camera really helps us out on that front. So having a place like a water bath, like a pool like that, a natural type pool, is a great way to have the birds come back and congregate and really get a lot of good head counts and account for a lot of birds. Yeah, and to your second question, that was about what to expect today when we do open the door. I hope we get to open the door today. We're still waiting. I've been getting updates from the crew. They start to see the weather break, and then it socks in again. So the pattern's going well in terms of the weather. It's just, we still have some waves of fog billowing through that are still keeping things a little on the wet side. But the good news is the winds are really calm. So as long as we get a clearing, all systems are going to be go once these clouds part. What to expect? I would assume, we're going to open the door, and I think there's going to be a little bit of time for these birds to take in the fact that the door is actually open. And then of course there'll be one of them will take the first step of the birds that are in there right now. My guess would be 966 is going to be the first to kind of explore and take the first leap out, but it could be 962, could be it could be 994, right? Is the other one we have in there, or 995? Sorry. Yeah, so the process is, and what all three possibly could go out at the same time. What we really hope is they all just gradually work their way out. They just take a steady approach. There's perches on the outside of the pen. Actually, the camera is mounted to a really nice perch tree that the birds love to use. And so we're hoping when they go out, they go right next to the camera. There's a nice big perch that connects to the pen, and then the tree itself is above the camera are ample perches. And that would really be the ideal, because they're not only outside the pen, they're in a safe perch, and they're looking down at where they should feed in the future. So, and they'll probably see other wild birds I think are perched in the area from what I've heard from the crew this morning. And so that would be the ideal. And then, if the skies are clear, they're more than likely to take that first flight. And we expect them to go out. They either tend to go, the ridge that this pin is on is kind of on a general north-south line. And so if they tend to go out, they'll hook either to the north or to the south. And how far they go, it obviously won't be very far, but they'll land somewhere. And there's tons of, it's a large area. The whole area is covered with very large pine trees. So there's plenty of spots for these birds to land on their first flights. And then of course the crew will be tracking where they go. And that's why we prefer to have, not only for them to have somewhat clear skies, but it also aids the crew in finding out where they go on that first flight. So yeah, and to your last question, Mike, I think the best measures that we've seen of success obviously are the reproduction, the nesting, and the number of nests we've seen. It just steadily increases every year. Condors nest, if they're successful, a given pair will nest every other year. And so we're seeing 10 plus pairs nesting every year. So we, in a sense, have 20 plus pairs that are active. And if they're successful, they're obviously taking that year off. So Yeah, so any given nest season, we're seeing 10 plus. We could be up over easily over into the 12 to 13 range for this upcoming year um, based on the predictions we have and just some of the pairs we know that are more likely to nest, and then some of the new pairings that looked like they were going to nest last season but are probably more than likely to try again this season. So in looking at those numbers, you know, we're definitely over 10 for this upcoming nest season, which is really great. And just looking at the production, you know, even despite the fire this year, we still had 4 chicks fledge in the wild, which is pretty amazing when you can, you know, of the 8, when you have something as devastating as a fire rip right through the heart of the condor country. So goes to show you how not only resilient condors are, but how resilient the nest sites they pick are. So they're, you know, it's not a guarantee that your redwood is going to protect your chick, but the redwoods in general are fire resistant just in their own design to protect themselves. So they've evolved a way to stand off fires as long as the fire, you know, is within a natural pattern. And that's what was unfortunate about this wildfire. It was an arson related fire, which is not natural, and it was and it burned at a time that, you know, probably wouldn't naturally happen. So we had certain things aligned, and then the fact that it burned through at night, you know, really burned through these areas where the condors were perched, where we knew we had a lot of condors perched at night. So the timing of it, so the, you know, back to that part of it, the unnatural part of this past fire is what I think really set us back. But back to, for nesting, even despite the fire, we had a great, you know, a decent year of production, 50%. That's pretty good, 50% of your young fledged. And so we're thinking next year we'll definitely, outside of any, you know, type of fire event, we think we're looking at a really, you know, we're hoping for an 8 to 10 chicks coming out fledging next year, which would be really awesome. And, you know, in previous years, we've been averaging about 6 to 8 chicks in the wild being produced annually. And that's the major step in the right direction. You know, and outside of lead poisoning, you know, our mortality seems to be within reason, so that within balance with what we're producing out in the wild. And our whole goal is to really get this flock to be in a positive growth rate. And what we found is with the lead poisoning setbacks is that when lead poisoning is present, we can't reach that positive growth rate. We can almost become even, but we can never get above it. So the goal is, if we are very confident if we can get reduce or remove that lead poisoning threat, we can definitely get this flock in the trend of a positive growth rate. And just based on the production, based on how well the birds are finding food on their own. And again, that gets us to this point where the birds no longer have tags, the birds are completely wild, self-sustaining. And, you know, I don't think we mention it enough, but I mean, I know myself and the crew can't wait for the day that we look up and see a condor without tags. So that's really going to be the true sign of success, that this flock is getting to that point. But right now, it's critical that we have these transmitters on the birds so we know what happens to them and we can gauge what the impact of lead poisoning still is. That's the only way we're ever going to really know when the lead threat is to a point where we don't have to worry about it anymore. So again, the lead outreach, you know, the free non-lead program, the working with the hunters and ranchers is so critical right now to the overall formula for success for this species. And we're fortunate that, you know, that if we get past lead, we feel like we're in the home stretch, and that the birds will sustain themselves for quite a while. And again, you've heard us speak to how resilient these birds are. Whatever nature throws at them, they're fine. It's just more of these unnatural type things like lead poisoning that can really put a kink in things. So,
Hey,
other questions like you see in there?
Yeah, Joe, we had a nice highlight in new participants, and so I just wanted to mention that we are in a A weather delay. If you've ever watched a baseball game and it started raining, this is sort of like that, where we are filling a little bit of time by talking about condors with you. We're going to remain online because we think that the weather will allow the releases to continue. We're just in a little bit of a delay, and Joe is actually in communication with his field crew. The field crew is on site, and they're able to keep an eye on the weather, and we're also able to look at weather patterns and sort of feel out when this release might occur, but we don't have an answer for exactly when it will occur at this point. So we're glad that you're here. We love your questions, and but we can't tell you exactly when the door will be opened up yet at this point. So we appreciate your patience in that. One of the viewers wanted me to say something more about the drinking water, and that is that even though the ocean is surrounding at least one side of the site, condors do not drink ocean water. They do find other sources of water. There can be freestanding puddles of water. So don't think of the condors as being dependent on that watering hole that you see on the sanctuary cam. We like to have that operational for them to be able to bathe and to drink, but they are able to find water sources elsewhere to drink. We also want to mention our Zoom schedule. Today's Zoom chat is not your only opportunity to spend time with us and talk condors with us. We will have a Zoom chat tomorrow on Thursday at 4 p.m. I believe, and that will we'll have more information about releases, and we'll be able to provide updates on your favorite bird, Nico, and take some of the questions regarding that. Some viewers had some questions about double clutching. We've stated that condors, their productivity is not very quick sometimes. If they get excessive adult mortality, it's hard for them to catch up in the productivity because they only lay one egg a year, and it takes them so long to raise that chick that they are not likely to be able to breed again the following year. So it's like one chick every other year. But there was a question about double clutching. Can they improve their chances by producing a second egg? And I'll say that they can lay an egg to replace an egg that is lost or depredated, so they can replace eggs. But do they lay an egg after a successful egg, and has that occurred, and is that something that we could ever expect to occur? I'm not sure, Joe.
Oh, sorry, Mike. Yeah, I caught you, broke up at the end there.
Yeah, just if there's an instance where condors have been able to double clutch, and maybe the answer is different for birds in captivity versus birds in the wild. Is there something you can say?
Yeah, so, yeah, good. Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, we've seen it in the wild. If it's early enough, we've noticed if it's early enough in the nest season, wild pairs will, if their first egg fails. There was a case, a great example is at Pinnacles National Park. They had a young pair lay an egg, and they believe the egg was predated by ravens, which have always, are probably one of the biggest culprits in, predating any condor egg. It's been historically documented. And so we saw this happen at Pinnacles. and the pair moved their nest slightly to a new spot and then recycled, basically they double clutched. And it was within a month between the two eggs. So that was believe our first evidence that they could double clutch in the wild. Whether they could, I've actually been asked, could they triple clutch in the wild? I mean, I don't think it's ever been documented, but I wouldn't put anything past a condor. It gets a huge amount of energy for a female to, especially in the wild, to produce another egg. It's a huge energy requirement from the female to produce that egg. So doing more than one in the wild, doing more than two in the wild would be a real stretch. Now in captivity, they've been able to manipulate that. In the early days of when they first brought the birds in, they were triple clutching some of the females, because again, they're in a controlled environment. They have a really healthy diet. And it was in a kind of a special, obviously, emergency situation where they were trying to get numbers back up. And that's one of the best tools they could use, is having a female lay more than one egg. The extra eggs would be artificially incubated and either fostered by another pair or they were raised by the puppets. A lot of you have seen the puppets that mimic a condor, and they would feed the chicks and raise them that way. So that was a great way to boost numbers in captivity. So yeah, that, in captivity, they're able to manipulate it a little more. They don't triple clutch. There's no longer the need to triple clutch anymore. They still are double clutching some females, but right now there are enough breeding pairs in the different captive facilities. For example, the Peregrine Fund up in Boise, the World Center for Birds of Prey, they have over 20 pairs. San Diego Wild Park, I believe, has 8. You have about 10 up at Oregon and roughly 10 at LA Zoo. So you have these pairs, and if each one of those pairs raise a chick, you have almost over 40 birds ready to be released in the wild. And if you double clutch a few of those, you increase the number. Not all those birds are slotted, like I had said before, genetically for release to the wild. Some are held back for genetic reasons. They're genetically valuable, and they, in terms of the geneticists, want those birds to stay in the captive breeding population to maximize the genetics for the species. So yeah, so that's kind of long and short of it. Yeah, so I mean, in the early days, double clutching and the triple clutching actually were a big part in saving the species.
A viewer had a question about the release site, and I'll just add that this release site is located in the general San Simeon area. We also have a sanctuary in the Big Sur area, and our main office is actually in Monterey. And so I'm actually in Monterey, and we have our field crew on site at the San Simeon site, monitoring both the birds and the weather. And so that's sort of where we are all laid out here at the moment. We are in a weather delay. There's a question about altruism. One viewer noticed an incident, perhaps from the bios, of condors feeding or taking care of a chick that was not related to them. And is that something that you've seen occur, Joe? Is that something that maybe older birds will occasionally bring in a younger bird, and instead of dominate them, sort of take them under their wing?
Yeah, that's probably been one of the most interesting that hadn't been previously documented with condors that we've observed since we started releasing them. Is we've actually had most release groups in the depending on if we can if the birds are going to be in the release pens for a longer stretch, we will sometimes bring up a mentor bird, an adult, to spend time with the chicks and help basically keep the release group cohesive and kind of be the class monitor, to kind of keep the peace. And so we've had the mentors there in the pen when we've released birds, and we've had release birds go out, take their first flights, and slowly work their way back to the release site. Sometimes it takes more than a week to get back, because as this process of learning to fly, they're bouncing around trying to figure out how to get back to where they got released from. And when they finally make it back, they're pretty hungry. And we've had them come up to the edge of the release pen, to the edge of the cage, and wing beg like they would to their parent. And the mentor, who is not their parent, will come over and instinctively they begin to regurgitate food for the chick. And we've observed this happen definitely in Big Sur with some of our release birds coming back to the pen and the mentors feeding them. And then in the wild, we've seen wild hatch chicks hanging out being fed by condors that aren't their parents. So that's another, it's not common, but it does happen, and we wonder how much it happens out of our view. So I think it is pretty cool to see that condors do have a way of taking care of each other, and maybe it's something built into the species for their survival, is that some of these to help out younger birds in general, just if a young bird is showing that it's hungry, to help it out. So it's sometimes they'll do that and get flushed, sometimes they'll do that and get fed. So it's really up to the bird. They're what we call wing begging. It's a pretty obvious behavior. You guys that watched a Nico this year in the redwood, whenever redwood queen and kingpin would show up, and Nico would immediately start rolling his wings and almost look like he was convulsing, or she was convulsing. And but it's a means they do, it's a behavior they do to solicit food, and it works really well. And they do that behavior to other adults, it will sometimes solicit the same behavior, and they'll feed the chick as well. And whether there's a strategy there for the population, in terms of helping out young, there could be something by design in there for the species to help itself. But honestly, we know it. There's other species that do it. I believe acorn woodpeckers, some of the other, you might know too, Mike, just some other species that do a similar, other bird species that do a similar communal, that help raise the young. I think acorn woodpeckers is probably one of the most studied on that, but it is interesting that we're seeing this in the condors. But it makes sense, that they would help out a young bird, and that's expressing that behavior and really needs help, really needs food. So I think it shows a little bit of a deeper level to our understanding of these birds, and just how they interact. And I don't know, another fascinating, really cool behavior we've discovered with condors.
Yeah, I've worked with so many different kinds of bird species, all of them smaller than condors. I usually work on the sparrow-sized birds, and for other species of birds, there's not a lot of individual variation. You see one house finch, they tend to act like other house finches, but with condors, there definitely is noticeable personality traits, and that's what makes them so fun to watch and follow. And I think a lot of our viewers are really catching on to how interesting these condors are when you follow the relationships and the hierarchies and all of that go into the whole different composition of the flock. Here's a question about the logistics. Who actually, either on a day-to-day basis or even now, who actually controls the cameras that we're seeing on explore.org?
It's mainly the field crew. We also have some of the cam moderators, some of the moderators from Explore can operate the Big Sur Sanctuary cam. But most of the time it's the field crew, because we're actually trying to identify some of the birds on the camera, obviously for our own data, and accounting for the different birds, especially some of these birds that I was telling you about that we call stealth. Their transmitters have stopped working. So yeah, for them, I would say the majority of the cam operation is by the crew, and yeah, we're cognizant that everyone's watching, but also we're trying to get our work done and make sure we see the birds. And we try to put them on, we try to put the cam towards sunset. We like to put it on obviously out towards the ocean. That's a pretty amazing view. And for the San Simeon cam. And then for the nest cam this year, we had to limit the amount of movement because we didn't want to startle the birds inside the nest. So that camera was fixed most of the time with some movement. And again, that was shared across, it was mainly field crew, but we had a couple people at Explorer that were helping. And so so for the camera operation, and we were actually really, the comments that were coming in were really valuable to us because we were wondering what people were interested in. We're looking at it from more of a science side of what we need to, the data we were trying to collect. And then it was great to hear the folks, the comments, especially on Explorer, where they were saying, oh, could you keep it on the bath a little bit longer? I really wanted to see this bird. So yeah, it was really good feedback. There was a great feedback loop, and we did the best we could in terms of going, oh yeah, people like that angle there. Let's hang on that one for a little bit longer. And especially the sunset views. I think everyone, I know I enjoy that Big Sur sunset every night. Some of the most spectacular you can get on a cam, I think. And and during the day, unless, when there's generally not a lot of activity going on, we kind of know behind the scenes what days are more active. If it's a general day, we just keep the camera fixed on the main area there, the pool, because that's an area birds will come back to just to bathe and get a drink, and you can kind of spot them in between. And then the days obviously we feed is when we manipulate the camera the most. That's a great opportunity for us to not only see the birds, just basically check in on all the birds. We'll zoom in sometimes. You might wonder why we're zoomed in on a tag. It's because we're looking at the actual tag because maybe it is malfunctioning and we're trying to figure out why. We're trying to see if the antenna is broken, and or there's an issue with a bird. We're noticing a bird that's not acting normal. We might fix the camera on that periodically. And, in working with Explorer, they know that takes priority. If we contact them and say, hey, we need to steer the camera the next couple of days, we have a bird we're concerned about, and or there's another need we have, they've been really great about letting us take the reins. And again, it might not be as aesthetically pleasing at those times, but if you wonder, that's behind the scenes. There's usually a reason we're looking at something else going on. And we try to, when we're not doing that, obviously, we try to keep it as aesthetically pleasing as we can. And most of the time, we can do both. So that's what's great. But yeah, just looking at the cam right now, that fog is just really not letting go. It doesn't want to let go of that ridge. All the forecasts I've been looking at while we're talking here, are showing everything clearing out fairly soon. So again, this is weather. This is a unique area. It's up on this high ridge line, and it's really hard to forecast weather for an area like this because there's no people in this area. So all the forecasts we're getting are from towns nearby, like Cambria, Paso Robles, San Simeon. So it probably is clear down there, but maybe not up here obviously not up here on the ridge. So we're doing the best we can with trying to see what's coming down the line. And believe me, the crew is chomping at the bit. They are dying to see those clouds part up top. I've been texting with them here, and they're doing their sun dance, trying to get that sun to come out. But again, appreciate everyone's patience. And again, we're doing this. This is really what in the best interest of the birds. We're on Condor time here. It's really about the Condors. So we're not going to push it. We're going to let them go out on the best situation we can give them. So again, I really appreciate everyone tuning in, and it's actually been a great time to update everybody on what's going on and answer some of these questions we get from viewers. And it's just, we just love the interaction, the time to kind of interact with everybody and let you know what's going on behind the scenes. And yeah, this is a really cool opportunity that presented itself this year. And again, we've never done a live release thing like this. And again, we're, you know, like anytime you do something like this, it just, there's different things, different elements that come in and delay things. So we're dealing with Mother Nature right now, and she definitely is. She's dictating the narrative for now. So we're hoping the skies part here. We have another hour to go. If we don't have any, it's not looking like in the next probably 20 minutes. If it's not looking like the skies are gonna part, if we don't start to see a trend, we'll just push till tomorrow. So tomorrow's definitely looking a lot better. We were hoping it was gonna clear out today, but again, if we have to push up another day, we're ready to do it, and just appreciate everyone hanging in there with us on this. It'll definitely be worth the wait. And yeah, we just had a little bit of weather to contend with. Any other questions you see,
Well,
Mike?
yeah, I just want to echo Joe and just express my appreciation for everyone who's tuned in. You know, it's we never know how things are going to go, but as you might guess, we love talking about condors, and so, you know, we appreciate having this time to be able to connect with you and answer your questions. There are more questions than we're able to answer, but luckily we have, you know, today we have a little longer that we'll wait this out, and also tomorrow we have our regularly scheduled monthly Zoom chat tomorrow at 4 p.m. that we can also talk condors with you. I wanted to know, Joe, real quick about the field crew. Now, have they been on site continuously since yesterday, or do they drive up, you know, overnight or in the morning, or you know, what's the deal there? What is the field crew having to go through right now?
Yeah, what is the field crew contending with is right. They definitely have their rain gear on, put it that way. It's been pretty wet. Fortunately, the field housing is fairly close by, so the crew has just been hunkering down, and they're swapping out the baton, so to speak, up there at the observation blind. It's not a heated structure. They're right, you know, they're enduring some of the elements with the birds. It's actually pretty chilly up there too. But yeah, they're doing what field biologists do. It's a, you know, you have the sunny days and you have the rainy days, so you know, you learn to adapt to that sort of thing. So big kudos to those guys. They're definitely taking one for the team, and just making sure everything's in line. You know, they're watching these birds close, and you know, they've got part of the crew's out watching the weather. They're out walking around the area, just looking to see if they see any windows in the weather. They had the sun come out, looked like it was starting to come out about 10 minutes ago, and then old man fog came back in. So it's definitely, you know, it's kind of minute to minute really. And then, but yeah, there's field housing nearby that they stay in overnight, and then during the day they're out and about. They're either out scoping out the area. There's also, you know, we have a lot of free flying condors around, so they're out monitoring, radio tracking, picking up signals for the free flying birds. And they've had quite a few around. Anytime you put young condors in a release pen, it attracts attention, especially from the older birds. They all start coming in, and it's been pretty fun to watch. And it's really cool to see some, as I mentioned earlier, some of the past San Simeon release birds coming back to pop in and say hi. So the so the crew's been, they're pretty darn busy, and they have a lot of night work. You know, at night they go out and make sure we have a fence that is around this the release area that they have to monitor. There's black bears in the area, and the fence is to keep the black bears out. Black bears are opportunistic. You know, they'd love to feed on these carcasses that we're feeding the condors. So we have a pretty stout fence that we monitor and make sure. And the crew earlier sent me some pretty big black bear footprint tracks in the mud in the road. So the black bears are out and about. The weather doesn't stop them either. So yeah, so there's, it's a pretty wild area we're in. It's a pretty remote, wild area. There's a lot of wildlife around. So, when you're not watching condors, you're usually seeing something else in the area that's pretty interesting. So yeah, the work never stops up there when you're out in the field with condors. But it's super rewarding, obviously. So they're going to be more elated than any of us. Let me put it that way. When we let these birds out, they've been sitting patiently watching it. But yeah, everyone's really excited on the crew. And this week we met earlier this week in anticipation of this, and everyone was really excited. We did see the weather coming down the line, which, it's almost like Murphy's Law. Anytime you say condor release, here comes the weather. So it's like, we know we have to contend with that, and that's just part of it. And again, we can wait. The good things come when we wait. We've noticed with condors, it's just part of the rhythm out there. You just kind of adapt and wait for those windows to open up.
Joe, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead, Kevin.
I'm kind of curious to see what this group of people think about, doing this again tomorrow morning, just as we have the last 2 days. Even if you don't have a presentation plan and it's just more hoping the birds are able to go out. Is there any way to kind of like, show hands being raised or anything, kind of get a pulse on that? I'd love to hear from this group.
Yeah, raise your hand. Everyone sees that button. If you'd be excited to come back in the morning and give this another go. It looks really good for tomorrow. I keep saying that, but
well, remind me how do you?
I'm seeing a lot of thumbs up, Kelly.
How do you raise your hand? I'm still working on the Zoom thing.
I've seen a lot of thumbs being raised.
So how do you do that? Can you explain that to everybody?
Yeah, so you go up to your corner of your, I think it's up in the corner of your screen, and it's an option that you can click. So yeah, we're up to, we have a lot of participants raising their hand.
Click on
I'm getting updates. Yeah, thumbs up. I think it's thumbs up or raise your hand. Really cool. Yeah, we're up to, oh wow, it's really going up. Okay.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of yeses in the chat as well.
Yeses or just any. Yeah.
Yeah, I think everyone understands that the bird's best interest is at heart here, and we're getting a lot of positive responses of people wanting to tune in again tomorrow to try and see this as well.
No, that's great. I think it'd be a lot of fun, and I think it's going to be worth the wait for sure. And so, yeah, good to know that a lot of you are willing to come back.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Great question, Kelly.
Yeah, and
I know I'll be back.
yeah, you'll be back, and we've actually had a few participants actually, just log in, and to reiterate, we are in a weather delay, and we're not sure about the actual time when the release will happen. It's looking like it might be better to do it tomorrow. There are more questions, Joe, if you want to continue.
Sure.
One of the questions is we see this San Simeon pin, and a lot of people are familiar with the pin that was on the sanctuary cam before the fire struck. And these pins serve multiple purposes. One purpose is to release birds, which we're experiencing today. But another purpose is to actually trap the birds periodically to maintain their transmitters. And there's a question about how that trapping actually works. What are the logistics in terms of how we actually get our hands on a bird and the process of handling a condor?
Yeah, we get that question a lot. That's a great question. Yeah, it's when we first started working with condors, that was actually one of the biggest challenges is, releasing them was one challenge, but after you release them, if you do need to swap out a transmitter, how do you get them back? And that's where, we were able to innovate in Big Sur and come up with some ideas and ways to use the actual release pin. The release pen they kind of see as their home base. It's not a nest, but kind of a place they see as a safe zone. And so we use that release pen as a trap. We use the very thing we released them from to bring them back in to catch them. So it's a really important tool. So when we say release pen, it's actually kind of a catch and release pen. We have different tools we use. We have these double door trap systems that we use to basically, we talk about soft release, but we do a very soft capture. We basically, after a bird walks into a part of the pen, we're able to shut a door behind it, open another door, and let it into the main flight pen. And again, that's kind of, so they don't actually get handled right away. They might spend a few days in the pen before we actually go in and start to hand put, basically use large hoop nets to capture them. And we typically like to do that. We like to get a larger group of birds and do maybe 10 to 12 birds in any given handling event. And just to make it smoother, that way you're not doing a bunch of small ones. And it actually, we found you kind of minimize the stress on the birds. And it's just more efficient for us as well. And, when you have almost 90 plus birds in the wild, just even catching 10 to 12 can be a challenge, let alone trying to capture all of them, So any given year, we try to capture at least half the birds in the flock. Some years we're successful in almost trapping all of them, but it's as these birds have gotten older and more wild, we have older birds that are really, really tough to catch. Just like you would imagine, they get smarter, they get wilder. And we have a bird that resides over in the area near Pinnacles National Park, Condor 330, and we only see him a couple times a year, let alone try to trap him. It's really rare when we're able to get our hands on that guy. So he's the most elusive bird in our flock right now, and that list is growing, and we kind of expect that. Obviously, as you have a wild population grow and expand and get more wild and spread out, it's going to be a lot tougher to bring them back because they're sustaining on their own, which is what you want. But at the same time, with a bird like 330, for us as managers of the flock and understanding what might be threatening these birds, it's really important that we try to maintain a transmitter on 330, because in case he goes off and dies somewhere and we weren't able to recover him, we would never know what he died of, and was it a threat we need to be concerned with, i.e. lead poisoning. So the transmitters are really critical right now for us understanding it and being able to assess the threat level, basically. So while it's awesome birds like 330 are doing what they're supposed to do, at the same time it presents a challenge for us. And if a bird like him never turns up again, we'll never know what happened. So it's a give and take. Fortunately, the younger birds tend to come back. It's when birds begin nesting, we have to get a little more crafty with how we catch them. And and again, it's a lot of time. That's again a big part of being a field biologist on our crew, is this time, that being on condor time, having a lot of patience and sitting inside these blinds, waiting for these target birds that, we have certain birds we add to a list. This bird's transmitter stopped working. Let's try to get, we might have 6 of those birds and we'll put them on a list and try it. The crew will start gearing up to get these birds back into the release pen and catch them. So it's just, and it's constantly changing throughout the year. We try to round up the birds in the spring and the fall in general. So we'll probably do a roundup this year after we're done with these releases. Basically even after Christmas, we might do a roundup in early January. And again, it's really targeted to just maintaining these transmitters. And fortunately, the transmitters function really well. They tend to last at least a couple years. And sometimes they just, we, like I was saying earlier, have an antenna break, or we have another concern for a bird that's not acting normal, and we want to catch it and maybe check its lead level, test the blood to see if it's suffering from lead poisoning or some not necessarily acute effects, but more mild early signs of lead poisoning. We like to get our hands on those birds just to make sure they're okay, and we can treat them before the lead poisoning takes their life. So yeah, that's kind of the gist of it. I think I don't know if I captured everything, Mike, but maybe you can.
Yeah, that was a good rundown. So are you prepared at this moment to pull the plug, or are you thinking that you want to wait longer to see if the weather improves? I know one consideration might be that perhaps you don't want to release birds too soon before it gets dark. Like there is some time limit, I'm sure, where you just say, all right, that's it. But I guess based on what we've seen from the weather, do you want to pull the plug now and reschedule for tomorrow, or do you want to wait a little bit longer? Either way, we can answer a few more questions, but I want to know if, just for the viewers who are thinking about logging off, are we at a point now where we're about ready to call it?
Yeah, so I think we can field a few more questions. I'm in contact with the crew, getting their input. But yeah, we'll have a decision pretty soon. You're right. That's why we have the latest we'll release a bird is typically around noon because of the shorter days. Right now it's dark by 5 o'clock, so we definitely want to give them ample time once they do go out to kind of navigate around and know where, get their bearings. And so yeah, I'm gonna get one more update from them on what's going on. If they start to see a major break in the weather, we might hang on here. But if I should be getting an update here pretty soon. But yeah, let's keep asking questions, and I'll have some some more feedback
on the nest cam. We saw a lot of drama between Redwood Queen, Kingpin, Nico, and a new character that came onto the scene, Ninja. And there's happy endings in store for Nico, and a lot of questions about what will happen in that territory. And so if you could cover, well, the specific question is, who picks out the nest site? And so what is Redwood Queen's likelihood of retaining that area to nest again? Does it seem likely that we might be able to enjoy another nest cam at that same location? And the status of the cam that's actually there. Obviously, we were able to watch, is that camera operational, and is there a possibility of being able, maybe as soon as next year, to be able to enjoy another nest cam?
Yeah, the camera inside the nest, for what we know, is still operational. The cable actually is still there. It's just a matter of reconnecting it. It did burn up, partway up the tree, but we wouldn't have to do wouldn't have to climb the tree to fix it, fortunately. At least the cable portion, but climbing that tree, obviously, with our situation with the Nico, everybody saw transpire with that tree being as damaged as it was, just isn't an option. And we've consulted a lot of different folks about the health of that tree after the fire, and just the human risk is just too high for the risk versus reward just isn't there. So yeah, I'm hoping that I can repair that cable portion being, we're able to get that camera going again. But in terms of whether it actually will be used again, we've seen a lot of variation with that. We've seen, whether the male picks the nest. I think the male, and we've seen it vary with pairs. We've seen females actually lead the way in terms of where the nest is, what nest they use, and then the male obviously will protect the territory, and then some nests we'll see where the male really just rules the roost and will lead the charge on every direction. But so we've seen a lot of variation in that. So I don't think we can say it's a male-driven thing. There's just different layers to it. There's the actual territory, which is obviously the space that a pair will protect and claim. And then within that territory, there's multiple areas they can nest. So what we think is the male really drives the actual establishing the territory with a lot of help from the female, obviously. And then when it really comes down to nesting, there's just multiple probably options that the female has within that territory. But at the end of the day, I really think it's up to the female where she lays the egg. But again, it's probably within that area established by the male, but there could be multiple nest sites that she gets to choose from. And, and it's really, it could be, as we've always wondered too, it's just preference. They like certain nest space. They probably look at all the different options they have within their territory. This tree cavity, wow, my tail doesn't quite sit in. Could come down as trivial as that. Or, like with 190, she has this really spacious redwood. It's probably one of the most spacious cavities that we see the condors use. That's at the max size of some of the redwoods in our area. And we've seen similar sized cavities, but I would say it might come down to that. So, it's whether the male, say 729 Ninja is, despite the interaction they had, he could be a suitor for 190. It would be a lower ranking male for sure. But the other option is that a higher ranking male comes in and takes over a prized territory. So, what Kingpin had was was the first nest territory in our Central California flock. So I would assume that there's a good chance that someone will repair with 190. 190 will get a new mate. And that new mate would be very interested in taking over this territory held by this esteemed male Kingpin. I mean, that would make a lot of sense from a strategic standpoint. If you're within a hierarchy. So it'd be interesting to see, because some of these males she could pair with do have historic territories they've used in other areas. So whether they'll want her to come with them it's really, I think, that dynamic that we still don't really understand, and it varies pair to pair on that male-female dynamic, and how willing, who's really, because some of these females are more dominant in the relationship than others, and so it's there's a lot of really interesting, fascinating variation going on in that. So whether this nest will get used again, my guess is it will. It's a prized territory. It's, again, it's one of our first territories, and it was held by one of our top ranking males. So I would assume that another male is going to want to come in and take that over.
Yeah. For those just joining us, we are in a weather delay, and we're giving it just a little bit more time to see if the weather improves enough for us to actually open the door and do the releases. So certainly tomorrow is on the table for a release schedule, but we are hanging with you just a little bit longer. There's some questions about about some of the fates of condors. We unfortunately had some birds lost in the recent wildfire, and then there are others that have died for various reasons that we're not sure of. And when I say we're not sure of, I mean the general public. When they go to Condor Spotter, sometimes there's a note saying that the necropsy is pending.
Mhm.
And so there's a question about the delay in that information. And I imagine sometimes it is difficult to determine a cause, and maybe there are different factors that go into a decision. But maybe if you can comment on if there is typically a delay in these issues. And one of the examples was Condor number 199, the great one, whose necropsy is pending. If you have any specific information on that bird, that would be great. But in general, describe some of the
Yeah.
process of getting word from the zoo and to us, and getting that information on Condor Spotter or the bios.
Yeah, so that's an awesome question, and that's one that, you know, we wish we could tell folks what happens sooner. But the reality is, when we retrieve a dead bird from the field, 199 is a great example. We go out and find this bird, recover it. So Ventana Wildlife Society reports to U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So these birds are submitted to U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and they are sent to a lab up in Oregon, Ashland, Oregon, to a pathology lab and examined. And these birds are submitted. It can take months before they get all the lab results back and can come up with a conclusive cause of death. And sometimes they aren't completely conclusive. It depends on the condition of the bird when you recover it. If the bird's fairly fresh when you recover it, you have a better chance of getting a conclusive cause of death. If the birds have been dead for a while, either, you know, their carcasses were consumed partially, you know, they're rotten, you know, there's not a lot of organs to recover. Unfortunately, that is what happens sometimes. Those aren't the days I do want to remember as a biologist, but they are part of it. And so, like with the case for 199, one of our crew went out. We had a mortality signal come in for 199, which is never good. We tracked down the signal in Big Sur, found him laying face down at the base of a redwood tree, and he was deceased. Yeah, we package that bird up. There's a process where, you know, you basically have to ship these birds up to the lab, and they're packed in ice. And we do there's a whole chain of evidence, chain of custody procedure we follow. Anytime we recover a condor, we're really careful around the area to make sure there was no foul play first, and then if we can rule out foul play, then we follow whatever U.S. Fish and Wildlife wants to do. And again, they're the lead agency when it comes to, you know, whenever you recover a dead condor. And so these birds are shipped off pathology, and then we wait. And they'll give us some preliminary reports, but we typically, in that time, it will maybe not, and we can't basically, I can't speculate to the public what the condor may have died of. What if I'm wrong? You know, so it's really important we wait and get that official necropsy result, the official cause of death, before we say anything. But it is difficult because we tell folks we've lost a bird, but we don't know what it died of yet. And, you know, people are really curious what these birds died. It sometimes takes months to figure it out. And for the case of 199, we did find out that he died of lead poisoning. And so that was what we suspected, but it was good to wait and get the official cause of death. So that's an example of kind of the process. And this goes for all the birds. You know, and, you know, with the fire this year, obviously, you know, you have a large number of birds that we're most likely never going to find, because if they did burn, the fire burned so hot, you know, it left nothing behind. So it was, that's a more difficult situation that, you know, we look to Fish and Wildlife Service for guidance on that. And, you know, after a certain period of time when birds have not resurfaced, that's when we call it, basically. We call these birds missing, presumed dead from the fire. So yeah, so the 11 birds that we lost, the 9 free-flying birds and the 2 nestlings, you know, we've officially called lost in the fire. They haven't resurfaced. We did really intensive search efforts. Everything we know of, every trick in the book we could think of to go and find these birds, just hoping they might be hiding out somewhere. And unfortunately, none of that came to fruition. And you know, in hindsight, looking back at the data, you know, that, you know, I talk about the GPS data we've had, and just the data from that day. The cam was so important that day. I don't know if most of you realize, just having us understand how many birds were actually around. I mean, I was monitoring the camera that day, and I had 28 condors confirmed on the camera, 28 different individuals, and we were very confident that most of those birds roosted nearby that night. And so to lose 9 of those when it could have been probably much higher. And, you know, having been back to the area where we think these birds were roosting that night, when some of them were lost, we noticed that, you know, it was really down to the randomness of where you decided to perch that night on whether you lived or died. And it was, you know, the way the fires burn, you know, it's pretty, there's a pretty erratic pattern to it. And I think it came down to that. You know, birds were probably perched within, you know, a bird perched in one tree, and then next bird was perched 100 feet over. One of those birds died, one of those lived. It was really that simple. We think some birds just got lucky, but we think the losses could have been much higher. So while the losses were devastating, we do feel fortunate that we didn't lose more. Based on what we saw on the cam that day, we knew there were a lot of birds perched in the area. And so again, to lose 9 is devastating, but to have lost 28 would have been even more, would have been even worse. So yeah, you got to take what you can get. But you know, being up there in that area after, it was very revealing to me to see like the randomness of the fire. It left some stands of trees completely untouched, and literally 50 feet away there was nothing. You know, everything burned to the ground. So pretty random. You know, that's the nature of wildfires. They tend to do that. And that's probably what saved some birds that night. And so the 2 nestlings, you know, those trees, unfortunately, just the fuel loads around those trees were higher than some of the other nest sites. Like, and Nico's nest was fortunately that area had burned in the 2008 fire. And so the fuel loads below that nest, just from what we know as well, are much smaller than the 2 redwoods where the chicks perished. Those areas hadn't burned in a while, and they were there was a lot of fuel load below them just based on what we had observed. So, you know, it was unfortunate to have lost those 2 nestlings, and but we have, as of right now, we pretty sure those, you know, we're, you know, based on the working with Fish and Wildlife, that we're safe in saying that these birds are probably definitely been lost in the fire. But yeah, that's kind of some of the way we approach it. It's not a, you know, you wouldn't want it to be a fast process. You really want the, you know, the pathology folks to take their time and come up, you know, these and determine what the bird died of. It's just a process. You know, they have to send off anything they recover in the bird. Say it is lead poisoning, and they recover a chunk of lead in the bird, they have to send that off to make sure it is lead. So there's a whole process to it. And yeah, you know, it's just, again, patience, and we find out, and but at the end of the day, those causes of death help direct our management, help direct our outreach. It's helped us figure out that, you know, this lead poisoning issue is something we have to assist with in the education side of things, and really working with hunters and ranchers who we consider conservationists, and you know, sharing the data with them as well, and just moving in that right direction.
Yeah, information is certainly power, and the technology really helps us to learn more about the threats that these birds face, and ways that we can mitigate those threats. There's a question about the territory size of condors, and I would imagine that the terrain of Big Sur might influence territory size as well. And so maybe like if they occupy a canyon, that might be a territory, and another territory might be the adjacent canyon, however far that might be. But what would you say is an average territory size, or is there just so much variation and circumstances now make that unclear? But what can you tell us?
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of variation, and I think it has to do with the local geography. Big Sur is really unique because you have these coastal canyons, and they're very steep and very vast, but they're a very interesting shape. They're almost triangular. They're almost like pie shaped. They come right down to the coast, and that pie shape will literally be that bird's territory. It might overlap a little bit into these other canyons, but in general, it's a canyon that will be identified for that pair. That's the pattern in Big Sur. And then you go over inland to Pinnacles, where you have a different landscape, where it's a little more laid out. But I think they do use ridge lines and prominent landscape features to kind of as kind of natural boundaries to their nest territories. And I would say, for a condor, 25 square miles is probably, on the upper end of a territory size, 5 by 5 miles by 5 miles. The canyon might be 2 miles wide, 5 miles long, so there's some variation. They could be as small as, I think a territory could be 5 square miles, so I think it really, in Arizona, it could be a completely different ballgame because you have these big, long canyons with these big cliff faces. So you can have I would suspect the territories to be much longer and larger in an area like that. Whereas in Big Sur, I think is probably where you'll see your smallest territories because you have such distinct, steep geographic features separating things. So yeah, there's I don't know if I described it that well, but yeah, just I think that in a gist that we see a lot of variation, but I think it's interpreted, if that makes any sense, by the how extreme the geography is around where these nests are.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and we appreciate you joining us. Unfortunately, the weather has delayed things, and it looks like it's going to delay things until tomorrow. And
I just talked to the crew, and just real quick, Mike, I checked in with the crew, and conditions, they think they're getting better, but they definitely think by the time they get better, we're going to be too late in the afternoon. And they're definitely feeling like tomorrow's the day. The weather forecast, everything's showing clear skies, so all the way through the weekend. So I think it's the best bet. And the birds are still pretty wet. They're going to take at least, we want to give them at least an hour to dry out, which puts us into the 1 to 2 o'clock range, which is a little too late in the day to release condors. So we just thank everybody for hanging in there today, and please come back tomorrow. This will happen.
Same time, same login credentials. No need to RSVP, and I believe Kathy is sending emails again to just as a reminder to tune in. We thank Joe for his time. He actually is getting ready to jump on with Mike Fritz of explore.org, and he's actually going to do another live chat just in a few minutes. And so that's on Anico. It's an Anico update. So it'd be great to hang out with Mike. Mike Fitz, he's always great with he's got a whole list of questions. We're going to go over Anico's whole story and his current status, so tune in at 1. All of you are familiar with explore.org, and there's you can sign up there. Okay, yeah, so catch Joe on explore.org just in a matter of minutes. And so we will actually sign off now with our extreme thanks for joining us. We appreciate your patience. We appreciate your thirst for condor knowledge and your love of the birds. It really inspires us in what we do. And thank you so much for joining us and being with us for so long. Come back tomorrow, and also for the 4 o'clock Zoom chat, we'll see where we are when that happens. But thanks to Joe, thanks to you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening. See you tomorrow.